I'm not afraid. Besides, I've never seen a human up close. Come out. No. No. They mean to kill me. And besides, they're hideous to look at. That's extremely rude. Don't listen to him, Balthazar. You're classically handsome. It's not right to steal, but we don't kill people for it. Come out. Come out this instant. Are you fully grown? No. I believe he's just a boy. And you're just a girl, I think. Who are you? I'm called Steph. Who are you? I'm Maleficent. Yes, right. You have to give it back. Give what back?
An aged narrator recounts the tale of Maleficent Angelina Jolie, a mighty and commanding fairy who dwells in the moors. Long ago, two neighboring realms stood side by side. The human kingdom, ruled by a vain and ambitious monarch, and the moors, a serene land filled with kind-hearted mystical beings. Among these creatures lived Maleficent, Isabel Malloy as a child, a young fairy with grand wings who took on the role of protector for her fellow denizens of magic. One day, three tiny fairies, Knotgrass, Imelda Staunton, Flittle, Leslie, Manville, and Thistlewood, Juno Temple, inform her that forest guards have caught a thief near the border. The trespasser is a poor orphan boy named Stefan, who returns the gem he stole and reveals he has no true home. Maleficent forgives him, sparking a friendship that continues for many years. When Maleficent turns 16, Stefan gives her a kiss. He calls true love's kiss, yet later abandons her to pursue his desire for power within the king's court. As Maleficent, now portrayed by Angelina Jolie, matures, she becomes the defender of the moors. Eventually, Stefan drifts away from her entirely. When King Henry Kenneth Cranham, ruler of the humans, tries to invade the moors, Maleficent gravely wounds him and drives him back. Consumed with hatred for her, Henry declares from his deathbed that whoever kills Maleficent shall inherit the throne and wed his daughter, Princess Layla. Overhearing this, Stefan, Chateau Copley, visits Maleficent, under the guise of warning her of the king's threat. Maleficent, delighted to see him again, suspects nothing. Stefan drugs her as she sleeps, intending to kill her, but cannot go through with it. Instead, he cruelly severs her wings with iron deadly to fairies and delivers them to the king as proof of her death. Shattered by betrayal, Maleficent rescues a raven named Diavel, Sam Riley, from a farmer by transforming him into a man. In gratitude, he pledges himself as her loyal servant and becomes her substitute wings. Through him, she learns that Stefan has married Princess Layla and been crowned king. Crushed by the truth of Stefan's treachery, Maleficent declares herself Queen of the Moors, corrupting the once peaceful land into a dark domain, with only Diavel as her confidant. Surrounding her home with ominous magic, she positions herself as the eternal enemy of the human kingdom. Time passes, and Diavel informs her that King Stefan celebrates the christening of his infant daughter, Aurora, Elle Fanning. Seized by vengeance, Maleficent intrudes upon the ceremony and places a curse on the child. Before the sun sets on Aurora's 16th birthday, she will prick her finger on a spinning wheel and fall into a sleep resembling death. When Stefan begs for mercy, Maleficent scorns him, but adds a loophole only true love's kiss can break the spell, though she and Stefan believe such a love does not exist. In fear, Stefan entrusts Aurora's care to Knotgrass, Flittle, and Thistlewood until her 16th birthday has passed. Meanwhile, he destroys every spinning wheel in his kingdom, locking the remnants away in the castle's dungeon, and arms his soldiers with iron weapons forged to kill Maleficent. Despite her initial contempt for Aurora, Maleficent slowly begins to soften toward the princess when the bumbling pixies fail in their duty to properly watch over the child. The princess remains unharmed under Maleficent's curse, which ensures her survival until her 16th birthday. After a short encounter with the young Aurora, Maleficent begins secretly watching over her. Over time, she realizes that Aurora is kind-hearted and pure, undeserving of the terrible destiny set upon her. When Aurora reaches the age of 15, Maleficent casts a temporary slumber on her and carries her to the moors. Upon awakening, Aurora is enchanted by the breathtaking fairy realm and feels no fear when Maleficent reveals herself. Believing she has always been watched over, Aurora affectionately calls her fairy godmother. From that moment, the two develop a bond, and Aurora often returns to visit the moors. She matures into a lovely young woman, unaware of her royal heritage or the dark spell tied to her future. As her 16th birthday approaches, King Stephen's paranoia deepens. With the queen dying, he becomes consumed with the knowledge that Maleficent will reappear when the curse is meant to be fulfilled. He keeps her stolen wings locked inside a glass case in a remote part of the castle, obsessively speaking to them as though they were alive, and ignoring all else besides Maleficent. He sends soldiers to track her down before the curse can come to pass. Meanwhile, Maleficent, who has grown to care deeply for Aurora, tries to undo the spell, only to find herself powerless, as she had declared that no force on earth could ever reverse it. Diavel reminds her that true love's kiss still holds the potential to break the enchantment, but Maleficent admits she only added it as a cruel impossibility, believing no such thing existed. Aurora later crosses paths with Prince Philip Brenthwaite's, and though they are instantly drawn to one another, their connection is too brief to grow into real love. On the eve of Aurora's birthday, Maleficent, desperate to keep her safe, allows her to live in the moors, away from any spinning wheels. But when Maleficent tells the pixies of this plan, they reveal the truth about Aurora's identity and curse. Shattered, Aurora flees to her father's castle. Rather than embracing her, Stephen, obsessed with destroying Maleficent, locks Aurora away in a chamber, hoping to protect her. Yet the curse compels her into the dungeon, where fragments magically form into a spinning wheel. She pricks her finger and falls into a death-like sleep. In an effort to save her, Maleficent kidnaps Philip, enchants him into slumber, and rushes him to Aurora. She lays Aurora in her chambers, where Stephen furiously blames the three fairies for failing to guard her. Maleficent infiltrates the castle, leading Philip to Aurora so he might kiss her and end the spell. However, his kiss has no effect, as their love is not true. Maleficent, overcome with regret, vows to protect Aurora and kisses her forehead. This act of motherly devotion awakens the princess, proving that Maleficent's care for her is true love. Aurora forgives her, and they attempt to escape, but Maleficent is captured in an iron net and attacked by Stephen's men. She transforms Diavel into a dragon to fight for her, but even he is overwhelmed. Stephen viciously beats Maleficent, mocking her, but before he can finish her, Aurora frees Maleficent's wings from captivity, and they rejoin her body. With her strength restored, she defeats Stephen and carries him to a tower, though she refuses to kill him, declaring their war ended. Stephen, however, ambushes her, and both plummet from the tower. Maleficent saves herself with her wings, while Stephen falls to his death. With peace restored, Maleficent lifts the dark enchantments from the Moors, returning them to their former beauty. The human kingdom and the Moors unite under Aurora, who's crowned queen of both realms. Aurora and Philip continue their romance, while Maleficent, finally freed of her hatred, soars joyfully with Diavel over the peaceful moors. The narrator at last reveals herself to be an older Aurora, reflecting on the tale. If you are expecting Maleficent to be a straightforward live-action retelling of Disney's animated classic Sleeping Beauty, then you are bound to be very let down. Rather than sticking to the familiar script, this film reimagines the tale altogether. While some may argue that this approach is terrible, it's important to remember that there has never been a single fixed version of Sleeping Beauty. Charles Perrault recorded it, as he did with other French fairy tales like Cinderella, but much like the Grimm brothers' German stories, these originated as folk tales that existed in countless variations. So, when viewed as just another reinterpretation, the film becomes easier to appreciate. This take offers insight into Maleficent's past, showing her as both kind-hearted and later vengeful, with her transformation tied to the cruelty of King Stephen, Aurora's father, who betrays her. Personally, I found the excessive CGI to be overwhelming and sometimes distracting, yet I thoroughly enjoyed the twist on true love's kiss. which cleverly dismisses the tired and unrealistic trope of love at first sight. My overall impression is that while this film is no masterpiece, it's still a worthwhile watch. It sits somewhere between mediocre and great, similar to children's storybook reinterpretations like The Three Little Wolves and the Big Bad Pig, or The True Story of the Big Bad Wolf, which flip older tales upside down. As someone who treasures Sleeping Beauty as one of Disney's finest works, and who has always considered Maleficent one of the most frightening and unforgettable female villains in the studio's history, I did find this film held my attention despite its mixed reception. Watching it late compared to its release, I realized it had just enough merit to prevent it from being a complete disappointment, though ultimately it remains underwhelming. The strongest element is undoubtedly Angelina Jolie's performance. Not only does she look phenomenal in her striking costume and flawless makeup, but she also manages to embody menace and allure while injecting occasional wit into her portrayal. Visually, the movie is stunning. The cinematography is rich. The sets and costumes are detailed and atmospheric, and the director's long career in special effects is clearly evident throughout. James Newton Howard's score further elevates the production, haunting, whimsical, and beautifully orchestrated as one might expect from him. In terms of plot, the christening scene is the standout sequence, suspenseful and powerful, establishing both the tone of the movie and Maleficent's threatening presence with great impact. The sharp, slightly dangerous banter between Maleficent and her shape-shifting servant Diaval, played eerily well by Sam Riley, also shines, forming the most believable and engaging character dynamic in the story. The issues, however, are hard to overlook. After being introduced as one of Disney's darkest and most iconic villains, seeing Maleficent softened and humanized never feels convincing, no matter how hard the film tries. Worse still, in focusing on her origins and sympathetic side, the rest of the characters are weak and reduced either to dull stereotypes or distorted shells. King Stefan suffers most, written as a shallow, one-note villain. Prince Philip contributes almost nothing to the plot. Aurora's mother is barely present, and the three good fairies come off as more irritating than endearing, their bumbling incompetence making them borderline unbearable. As for performances, Jolie towers above the rest. Riley does well with what little he is given, but his role lacks substance. Elle Fanning's Aurora is disappointingly flat-dazed and lifeless. Even if the animated Aurora was somewhat passive, she at least stood out for her elegance, charm, and distinctive singing voice, qualities completely absent in Fanning's portrayal. Sharlto Copley's Stefan is exaggerated, yet strangely disengaging. Brendan Thwaites is forgettable as Philip, and though Juno Temple, Leslie Manville, and Imelda Staunton are talented actresses, their fairy roles reduce them to irritating caricatures whose comedic attempts fall painfully flat. Much of this stems from Linda Wolverton's weak screenplay, marred by stale, cliched dialogue and clumsy attempts at humor that rarely land. Aside from the christening sequence and the interactions between Maleficent and Diaval, the film suffers from a jumble of inconsistencies and recycled concepts, most of which were handled far more effectively in previous Disney projects like Frozen. The magic never fully captivates, and Aurora's rapid forgiveness feels difficult to accept. The tale unfolds across two neighboring realms, a human kingdom ruled by a greedy and power-driven monarch, and the Moors, a land thriving with mystical beings. Into this world wanders Stefan, a homeless orphan boy who befriends Maleficent, herself an orphan fairy girl. Though close in youth, they drift apart as the years pass. Eventually, the king wages war against the Moors, where an adult Maleficent, Angelina Jolie, fatally wounds him. On his deathbed, he offers his crown to anyone who can slay her. Stefan, Sharlto Copley, seizing his chance, betrays Maleficent, drugging her and severing her wings. Rewarded with the throne, He fathers a daughter, Aurora, whom Maleficent curses. On her 16th birthday, she will fall into a death-like slumber, breakable only by true love's kiss. To protect her, Stefan entrusts 3 bumbling pixies, Flittle, Leslie Manville, Malgrass, Emeldeston, and Thistlethwaite, Juno Temple, to hide her in a remote cottage until her fate is sealed. The attempt to reframe Maleficent as a wronged figure is understandable, and the production design is undeniably striking. Jolie visually embodies the character, though her performance often feels flat and emotionally one-note, draining vitality from a role that desperately needs charisma. The story begins in childhood, but the brief montage of young Maleficent and Stefan lacks warmth and playfulness. It rushes forward in an effort to reach Jolie's entrance. While the reinterpretation of True Love's Kiss works well, the Pixies fail to deliver much humor or charm. Overall, the movie presents a mixture of strengths and weaknesses. Crafting a fresh vision of such an iconic villain requires bravery, and Jolie nearly convinces with her presence. But the shadow of Disney's 1959 Sleeping Beauty looms large. Still, the atmosphere, strange flourishes, and faint echoes of the old fairy tale genre give the film some appeal to wide audiences. As a reimagining of classical values with modern ambitions, it is a bold if uneven exercise, seductive in its darker qualities, though imperfect in execution. At its core, Maleficent is a fairy tale reworked into live action, shifting the spotlight from princess to villain, portraying her as a misunderstood outcast yearning for love. Unfortunately, the thin writing and reliance on excessive CGI undercut the effort. Endless computer-generated landscapes, castles, and creatures dominate the screen, while tacked-on battle sequences fail to engage. Jolie's stylized look, complete with prosthetic cheekbones and colored lenses, proves distracting rather than transformative, and supporting players like Sharlto Copley and Sam Riley are squandered. The narrative drags, weighed down by shallow characterizations, leaving the film as a hollow spectacle rather than a moving story. Initially, even the promotional artwork gave the impression of cheapness, suggesting Halloween costume aesthetics, but the finished film does look better than expected. Nonetheless, despite its visual allure, it raises the question of whether this new vision is more an act of dismantling than celebrating the 1959 classic. Is this the kind of film you watch once, enjoy briefly, and then move on, wishing it had more depth? I tend to believe it sits somewhere in between, because even though I was entertained, I was equally let down by how much of it was pure style with very little real substance. And the acting overall did not rise above uneven at best. Performances fluctuate wildly, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes flat to the point of dullness. Added to that, the feminist slant in the portrayal of the lead character often renders her difficult to sympathize with. Maleficent's origins are set up convincingly introduced as a beautiful young fairy who encounters a poor farm boy, Stefan, who ultimately betrays her. His own ambition drives him to betray her in the cruelest way, cutting off her wings to gain favor with a dying king after she had already humiliated that king in battle. This treachery fuels her thirst for revenge and sets the stage for the famous curse of the spinning wheel, along with her involvement in Princess Aurora's fate. Angelina Jolie's performance alternates between hushed, delicate lines and furious outbursts, creating a character that comes across like a fairy split between extremes, almost as though she were unstable and in need of treatment, even when she lifts the curse after forming an unusual attachment to Aurora. Her motives feel ambiguous, suggesting revenge still lingers beneath the surface. At certain points, particularly once Aurora and Maleficent's bond develops, the storyline echoes Rapunzel's tale, reminiscent of the version adapted into the film Into the Woods. What stretches credibility is how Aurora never recognizes the ominous, darkly dressed Maleficent as the same fairy who cursed at her. I never fully accepted the shift from an innocent fairy into what appears to be an evil queen figure reminiscent of Snow White's tormentor. While the computer-generated imagery dazzles visually, that alone does not guarantee quality storytelling. At best, the movie is competent, neither a masterpiece nor a disaster. Yet the heavy-handed anti-male tone grows tiresome, and the attempt to soften a character traditionally viewed as purely villainous doesn't always succeed. Unlike the musical Wicked, which made the Wicked Witch relatable, this portrayal skews Maleficent into something closer to a demonic figure fixated on destroying the shallow king who once kissed her. The reprise of the original love theme at the film's conclusion feels unsettling, its sinister edge haunting rather than heartwarming. This version of Sleeping Beauty plays out more like Disney's grim, Shakespeare-inspired twist on Macbeth. Still, I appreciated Disney's attempt to retell the fairy tale from Maleficent's perspective. Jolie's betrayed fairy, embittered. After losing her wings, curses Aurora less out of malice toward the child and more from her desire for revenge. Ironically, since the king entrusts the baby to 3 bumbling fairies incapable of caring for her, Maleficent herself ends up protecting Aurora from afar, even ensuring she survives basic needs. The script, however, suffers from major issues, some of which might confuse or unsettle younger audiences. The depiction of the 3 fairies borders on negligent rather than comic, while the human characters are largely painted as ruthless and power-obsessed, eager to destroy the magical realm. Sharlto Copley's portrayal of King Stefan is uneven, his accent wandering between South African, Scottish, and Nordic tones, while his character's obsession with power makes him unsympathetic. Despite lavish sets, striking costume design, and Jolie's commanding performance that elevates the material beyond what it deserves, the film remains a flawed fantasy. Personally, I had expected a darker take, especially after the way it was promoted. The marketing promised a break from the traditional bedtime story, but what we actually received was still close enough to Disney's typical formula, only with slightly darker overtones. That's not necessarily bad, but such misleading advertising only makes the final product feel lighter than expected. At first, my reaction to the somewhat familiar storyline was not one of great excitement. However, upon reflecting afterward, I must admit the plot holds up well, even if it is highly predictable, and Angelina once again secures a role worth remembering. Children will likely be fine watching it, provided they aren't too young, since fairy tales are meant to have a touch of darkness, just enough to be thrilling. Sleeping Beauty remains a cherished tale from the Brothers Grimm, passed down through countless generations, and Maleficent reimagines that legend. While it is not a poor film in fact, it contains strong storytelling, fine performances, well-done writing, and impressive effects. It also demonstrates Hollywood's current lack of originality, where classics must be reworked rather than new ideas created. For those who grew up treasuring the timeless beauty of the original fairy tale, such reinvention can feel disheartening. Still, my personal rating is an 8. The basic framework of the story is widely known. Maleficent, Angelina Jolie casts her spell on Princess Aurora, Elle Fanning, only for a prince, Brenton Thwaites, to awaken her with a kiss. A spinning wheel, a castle, and a fiery dragon complete the familiar elements. Yet Disney has retold the story in such a grand way that it may overshadow the original film. Here, Maleficent is portrayed not as pure evil, but as a misunderstood horned fairy with complexity and surprising depth for a film aimed at children. The traditional roles of good and evil become blurred, leaving us to sympathize with those once seen as villains. Jolie delivers a performance tailor-made for her, while Elle Fanning, though not the ideal casting in my eyes, still gives an adequate portrayal, even if somewhat eclipsed by Jolie's commanding presence. A memorable moment comes when Jolie quips, "I don't want children," a line that resonates both humorously and ironically. At its heart, the film suggests that those we think of as enemies may not be as wicked once we learn to see through their perspective. It is ultimately a family film that resonates equally with adults. I personally felt like a child again, happily munching popcorn while adding Metamucil to the mix. I had anticipated this release for some time, and after watching it, I am pleased that Disney delivered what I hoped for, a fascinating reinterpretation of the Sleeping Beauty tale. It preserves the soul of the classic while expanding its scope, particularly by shifting the lens to the supposed villain. Director Robert Stromberg succeeds in reshaping the story while balancing it with stunning visuals, as the enchanted marshlands come alive in vibrant colors and strange creatures before later descending into a dark and ominous setting reflecting Maleficent's inner turmoil. The effects team crafted this transformation with great skill. As for casting, there is no question that Angelina Jolie carried the film with authority, enhanced by striking costumes and extraordinary makeup that made her nearly otherworldly. If Jolie had not been chosen, Famke Janssen could have been another inspired option. In the end, Maleficent stands as a bold twist on a beloved tale, one that is as captivating to watch as it is visually striking. Robert Stromberg's vision gives us an alternate Sleeping Beauty, redefining Maleficent not as a monster, but as a protector whose motives, once revealed, expose the destructive tendencies of humans like Stefan. It underscores a message that humanity often corrupts whatever it touches, while offering a story that is both enchanting and thought-provoking. It may not be an exceptional film overall, yet I genuinely appreciate the way the character was handled. A fundamental element of storytelling is that a character must undergo transformation. And in this film, Maleficent experiences several meaningful changes, not only in her appearance, but also in her emotions and worldview. I would suggest a movie for those who want to see a fresh interpretation of the traditional Disney princess narrative. It makes you question whether all the versions of these fairy tales we've grown up with have perhaps been misleading. For that reason, it's worth a watch. When I first caught a glimpse of the teaser trailer for this Disney release, I was immediately eager to see it, anticipating a live-action story told from the perspective of the unforgettable villain of the 1958 animated masterpiece Sleeping Beauty. In this adaptation, Maleficent, played by Angelina Jolie, is portrayed as a once radiant and kind-hearted fairy who lived peacefully in the enchanted moors until repeated human incursions disrupted the harmony of her world. Her goodwill is shattered when her relationship with the ambitious Stefan, Sharto Copley of District 9, collapses because of his desire for power and the throne. After Maleficent defeats King Henry, Kenneth Cranham, in combat, the dying ruler declares that whoever kills her will inherit his crown. Stefan seizes the opportunity, but rather than slaying her, he incapacitates her with a drug and cruelly severs her wings with an iron blade, delivering them as proof of her supposed death. Devastated by the loss and enraged by Stefan's betrayal, Maleficent plunges her once bright realm into darkness, taking on the mantle of its fearsome ruler. She soon rescues a raven and transforms him into her devoted companion, Diaval, Sam Riley from Brighton Rock. Diaval confirms that Stefan has indeed become king, and later informs her that he and his queen are holding the christening of their newborn daughter, Aurora. Seeking revenge, Maleficent arrives uninvited to the celebration, where she casts an irrevocable curse. On Aurora's 16th birthday, before the sun sets, she will prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel and fall into an eternal sleep, only to be awakened by true love's kiss. Despite Stefan's pleas, Maleficent refuses to soften the spell beyond this one condition. In desperation, Stefan commands that all spinning wheels be locked away and entrusts 3 bumbling pixies: Flittle, Leslie Manville, Another Year, Knotgrass, Imelda Staunton, and Thistlewood, Juno Temple, Killer Joe, to raise Aurora in secret as mortals in a hidden cottage until her 16th birthday has passed. He also orders Maleficent's death, though she protects the Moors with an impenetrable barrier of thorns. Maleficent, however, quickly discovers the child's hiding place, and while she resents the girl, she repeatedly comes to her rescue since the pixies are neglectful guardians. Over the years, Aurora, Elle Fanning of Super 8, grows up under Maleficent's watchful eye, eventually meeting her at 15 and mistaking her for a fairy godmother, recalling her comforting presence. Throughout her childhood, Maleficent allows her into the Moors and their bond deepens. Despite her affection, Maleficent is powerless to undo her curse, having declared it absolute when it was first cast. Meanwhile, Aurora encounters Prince Philip, Brennan Thwaites, and Diaval suggests that he may hold the key to breaking the spell. Maleficent, however, reveals her grim conviction that true love does not exist, which is precisely why she crafted such an impossible condition. She invites Aurora to remain in the Moors, partly to protect her from spindles. But on the eve of her 16th birthday, the pixies finally reveal the truth of Aurora's royal heritage and Maleficent's role in her fate. Feeling betrayed, Aurora rejects Maleficent and flees to her father. Stefan, consumed by paranoia and bitterness, coldly dismisses her and confines her for her own supposed safety, unaware that the curse is drawing closer to fulfillment. As Maleficent rushes toward the castle, Aurora succumbs to the curse and, in a dreamlike trance, she is drawn into the chamber where all the spinning wheels have been confined. There, she pricks her finger on the sharp spindle of one reconstructed wheel and immediately falls into an enchanted slumber. Prince Philip is brought to her bedside and attempts to awaken her with a kiss, but it fails to break the spell. Instead, it is Maleficent herself who revives Aurora after expressing remorse and vowing to protect her. She places a gentle kiss on Aurora's forehead, which finally awakens her. Aurora forgives her, and the two attempt to flee the castle together. However, Maleficent is ensnared in an iron net. To defend herself, she transforms Diaval into a mighty fire-breathing dragon who battles the soldiers. Stefan then appears, mocking her for having lost her wings. Aurora, meanwhile, discovers the wings locked away in a chamber and frees them, allowing them to reunite with Maleficent's body. With her full power restored, Maleficent takes flight. Stefan clings to her in a desperate attempt to kill her once more, but he ultimately plunges to his death. In the aftermath, the fairy realm is restored to its former splendor, and Aurora is crowned queen over both the human and magical kingdoms, now united as one. She acknowledges her legacy as Sleeping Beauty and rules with Prince Philip at her side, while Maleficent embraces peace and joy with her wings restored. The cast also includes Isabel Molloy as young Maleficent, Michael Higgins as young Stefan, Ella Purnell as teenage Maleficent, and Jackson Buse as teenage Stefan. Angelina Jolie proves to be an ideal choice for the role of the once villainous fairy who ultimately reclaims her place as a guardian figure, balancing menace with maternal warmth. The special effects are spectacular, and the three pixies provide light-hearted humor, though Elle Fanning's portrayal of Aurora feels overly naive at times. While the reimagined storyline is somewhat predictable and less compelling than Disney's original 1958 animated classic, the film still offers an enjoyable fantasy experience. It even received an Academy Award nomination for Best Costume Design and earned recognition at the BAFTA Children's Awards in the feature film category. Overall, it is a worthwhile watch. This live-action adaptation tells Sleeping Beauty from Maleficent's perspective, presenting her not simply as a villain, but as a betrayed fairy whose bitterness turns to regret and eventual redemption. Stefan emerges as the true antagonist, his treachery setting the curse into motion. The film provides thrilling sequences that culminate in a dramatic climax, engaging both children and adults, though it may be slightly intense for the youngest viewers. The conclusion delivers a satisfying sense of closure, with Jolie's commanding performance elevating Maleficent into a character who is formidable yet sympathetic. The visual effects are undeniably striking, particularly in the portrayal of the magical beings that inhabit the story. I would recommend this film, especially to those who enjoy imaginative retellings of traditional tales. Among Disney's many adaptations, Para's Sleeping Beauty remains one of my personal favorites, and this movie smartly focuses on the most intriguing character from that beloved classic, the dark enchantress Maleficent. What's compelling is how the film reimagines her, showing that this iconic figure of cruelty was once a gentle and kind fairy, until her trust was shattered and her wings cruelly stolen by a deceitful king. That betrayal ignites her rage and launches her on a path of revenge, culminating in the famous curse on the infant Princess Aurora. True to the source, the child is hidden away in the forest under the care of 3 fairies, though Maleficent's cunning allows her to remain close, watching as Aurora grows. Her mischievous meddling eventually takes the narrative down an unexpected path, diverging from the book's version. The cast delivers solid performances. Angelina Jolie, as Maleficent, could perhaps have leaned further into menace, but still embodies the role impressively. Sam Riley adds warmth as her loyal, shape-shifting companion Diaval, transformed at her whim to aid her plans. Elle Fanning plays Aurora with sweetness that might border on excessive, while Sharlto Copley injects chaotic energy into the unraveling. King Stefan. Brenton Thwaites manages a respectable English accent as Prince Philip, and the trio of pixies provide moments of comic relief. The production as a whole, despite a touch of cheesiness, is elevated by its lavish design and dazzling visual artistry. Personally, I wasn't enamored with the conclusion, though perhaps that comes from always rooting for villains like Darth Vader to triumph. The filmmakers pulled no punches in making the spectacle grand, and it certainly succeeds on that front. Even the end credits entertain, rolling over the names of the vast army of artists whose combined talents created this world. Behind-the-scenes extras reveal how much of the magic was achieved on sound stages, filled with forest-like props and blue screens, later enhanced with digital fantasy environments and characters. Both my wife and I found the experience enjoyable. The acting is good. The imagery is beautiful. Though overall, the film never quite surpassed the level of simply being very good. Jolie embodies Maleficent, ruler of the Moors, a realm constantly at odds with the human kingdom. Though she and Stefan once bonded as children, his ambition drives him to betray her as an adult, drugging her and severing her wings to secure his path to the throne. Her fury leads to the infamous curse that Aurora, upon her 16th birthday, will prick her finger and fall into a death-like sleep, broken only by a true love's kiss. Aurora, portrayed by Elle Fanning, grows into a radiant young woman, while her father, played by Sharlto Copley, descends into madness. A charming detail is the casting of Jolie and Pitt's own daughter as young Aurora, adding an intimate touch to the fairy tale bond between child and Maleficent. In the end, it is not a prince but Maleficent herself whose love awakens Aurora, cementing their deep connection. Stefan's attempt to destroy Maleficent costs him his life, and with his downfall, Aurora unites the human kingdom and the Moors as queen. This raises the question, was there really a need to reimagine Walt Disney's 1959 Sleeping Beauty for a modern audience? I would imagine executive producer and lead actress Angelina Jolie felt that way, since this role allows her the chance to reveal both sides of the wingless dark fairy Maleficent, who is presented here as both destroyer and redeemer. The opening shows young Maleficent and the future King Stefan beginning as friends, later sweethearts, but when he abandons her, and ultimately betrays her in his climb toward the throne. By cutting off her wings, we never get even a glimpse of his real nature. Linda Wolverton's unconvincing screenplay reduces Stefan, Aurora's father, to nothing more than a shameless deceiver and liar, stripped of guilt or remorse. Meanwhile, a chaotic battle unfolds between Maleficent and the reigning monarch, who seeks to conquer the enchanted moors. Yet it carries little meaning, it's all spectacle. While Jolie glides overhead with style but little authority, her sharp cheekbones outshining her conviction. Once Maleficent curses Stefan's infant daughter, three small fairies, Knotgrass, Flittle, and Thistlewood, arrive to deliver comic touches, though by then the film already feels doomed. Though the production design and visual effects are striking, sometimes too brightly sugary, other times murky, the storyline collapses into confusion. The expensive battles play like empty routine, and the true love's kiss revision, though promising, is handled without any genuine surprise. The filmmakers clearly invested their energy in the dragon and climactic castle fight, leaving the beloved characters underserved. I watched this retelling of Sleeping Beauty's villainess with a friend who works at a theater and his nephew. Jolie is captivating as the fairy-turned-sorceress who slowly rediscovers her compassion through Aurora, Elle, who brings warmth into her life. The film offers playful spins on character roles, prompting questions about who the true villain really is and how much differs from the original tale. The visual grandeur, booming score, and the light-hearted antics of the three pixies brought amusement, if not full laughter. In that sense, Maleficent becomes a lavish spectacle worth seeing. Telling the tale through the villain's eyes is an intriguing concept, but it falters because the villain never truly remains wicked. She only behaves cruelly for a handful of minutes before becoming the heroine. Some reviewers cry out that this shows misandry, which is laughable, no different than when hypersensitive critics invent prejudice in harmless details. The reason Maleficent ultimately saves Aurora is not because Disney wanted to push a women good, men bad theme, but because their studio could not allow the main character to remain irredeemably evil. Unfortunately, this softens the story. They could have portrayed her fall into darkness fully, then kept her that way, preserving closeness to the original while adding more compelling tension. Since the film is already somewhat violent for children, it wouldn't have been an issue. The updated take on the true love's kiss was refreshing, not because it suggests only women can love deeply, but because it reinforces that genuine love stems not from instant attraction, but from long familiarity. Still, while that message is touching, I wish they had retained the traditional approach. Visually, the movie shines. Breathtaking settings, enchanting shots, and Jolie's costume that makes her embody Maleficent perfectly. Yet the refusal to let her be truly sinister weakens the impact of her performance. She looks the part of evil without truly being so. In the end, it stands as a decent reinterpretation of Sleeping Beauty, blended with Brothers Grimm influences. The story remains engaging, though in typical family-friendly fashion, the plot often feels erratic and not entirely airtight. Unlike what one might typically expect from a Disney production, this film doesn't lean into the usual sunshine and rainbows formula. Instead, it carries a surprisingly dark tone, which works in its favor, though it's debatable whether that will resonate well with its younger target audience. Angelina Jolie delivers a strong performance in the lead, embodying Maleficent with the right mix of menace and elegance. Elle lends solid support as Aurora, while Sholto Copley feels somewhat miscast in the role of the villain. The name Maleficent itself had me curious at first. I assumed it was a fabricated hybrid, like ginormous, perhaps combining malicious and beneficent, which actually would fit the character's duality perfectly. Much like the musical Wicked, this film reframes a well-loved tale from a new vantage point. In this case, it revisits Sleeping Beauty, At times, it even echoes Lord of the Rings with its fantasy-inspired flair. Visually, the film is outstanding. The sets, makeup, wardrobe, digital effects, and atmosphere all seamlessly reflect the intended mood. Darkness feels genuinely ominous, while moments of brightness capture enchantment. Occasional narration moves the story along efficiently, and although the film presents a range of emotions, it avoids becoming too complex for children to follow. Jolie is undeniably the anchor. Her performance alone carries the weight of the story and is the reason the film works as well as it does. It is an enjoyable summer release worth watching. The story itself follows a fairy who, driven by vengeance, curses the king's daughter so that she will fall into an eternal sleep on her 16th birthday. The visuals in Maleficent are beautiful, especially the depictions of the fairy realm and its inhabitants, who are crafted with great imagination. Maleficent's appearance strikes a balance, cold and commanding, yet also noble, without being so terrifying that children couldn't watch. The developing bond between the teenage Aurora and Maleficent is a highlight, emphasizing the film's message that goodness can be found in unexpected places and that trust and love can reshape the world. While the darker tone edges close to what feels intense for a PG rating, mature children will likely find themselves captivated by the spectacle of stunning CGI and adventurous sequences. The movie embraces pathos while also playing with the idea of reversing traditional notions of good and evil. Some characters inspire loyalty, while others are made to be scorned. Critics of the backstory sometimes act as if this reinterpretation erases the original fairy tale or Disney's animated classic, but both still exist to be enjoyed. This version isn't meant to replace them, but to stand alongside them as an alternate take. Jolie's Maleficent shines, surrounded by a host of whimsical fairies and magical beings from the moors. Fortunately, the narrative avoids being disrupted by the cliché of overdone musical numbers, instead unfolding like a true dark fairy tale. It also redefines true love, showing it can exist beyond the stereotypical romantic form. The seamless blend of live action and visual effects creates a cohesive and enchanting experience. The three fairies are especially entertaining, and the entire production feels like a spellbinding modern retelling. This is a film for those open to fresh interpretations, who appreciate creativity in storytelling. It doesn't erase the old, but enhances the world of Sleeping Beauty with new layers of magic and meaning. In the opening scenes, we are brought into the lavishly designed kingdom of the Moors, a place vibrant yet populated by CGI creatures that sometimes lack genuine charm. Maleficent, portrayed first as a young girl, Isabel Molloy, serves as guardian of the magical forest, defending it against the greed and envy of mankind. In this retelling, her image shifts from the classic dark witch attire to earthy colors, with her iconic horns now paired with majestic wings. Her destiny alters drastically when she encounters Stefan, played by Michael Higgins in his youth, and later by Sharlto Copley. Gaining her confidence, he vows true love only to betray her, using deception to climb from peasant to king. In this adaptation, Maleficent is not simply a bitter fairy excluded from a royal celebration. She is reimagined as a woman scarred by betrayal. Thus, when she casts the infamous spell upon Princess Aurora, Elle, daughter of Stefan, her motive is vengeance against the man who robbed her of her innocence and wings. The transformation from virtuous protector to vengeful sorceress, however, feels sudden, delivered through a few costume changes rather than genuine emotional depth. With only 97 minutes to work with, the film hastily propels Maleficent through her girlhood, villainy, and eventual redemption, sacrificing the nuanced character development it promises. Under Robert Stromberg's direction, the greatest flaw lies in trying to soften and redeem one of Disney's most iconic villains. Initially, the story introduces Maleficent as the brightest and most benevolent of fairies, living peacefully among nature. Her downfall begins when she is deceived by Stefan, who severs her wings in a ruthless bid for power. Consumed by fury, she hardens into a creature of bitterness and wrath. As in the animated classic, she curses the princess in one of the rare strong moments of the movie. Yet, the narrative falters immediately afterward, losing its rhythm. As Aurora matures, Maleficent draws closer to her, taking on the role of guardian and saving her from danger multiple times. She even attempts to reverse the very curse she pronounced. This infusion of tenderness undermines the essence of her character, diluting the menace that defined her. The screenplay seems determined from the outset to humanize the villain, presenting Maleficent as the protector of the enchanted realm, while men are shown as power-hungry, greedy, and arrogant. Betrayed and stripped of her purity, she transforms into one of folklore's darkest antagonists. Screenwriter Linda Wolverton and her collaborators emphasize that evil has an origin, perhaps many. To illustrate this, they highlight her internal conflicts, culminating in the decision to inflict a permanent spell on Aurora. Still, the execution feels simplistic, with several underdeveloped ideas. It is intriguing, certainly, that her corruption stems not only from emotional betrayal, but also from physical violence. However, the pace falters as her conflicting nature comes to the forefront, especially when she begins to sympathize with Aurora, portrayed first by Jolie's own daughter, in childhood and later by Elle Fanning. Her affectionate nickname for the girl, Beastie, gradually becomes a sign of endearment, especially as she and her loyal raven Diavel provide genuine care while the three guardian fairies, Flittle, Leslie Manville, Knotgrass, Imelda Staunton, and Thistletwit, Juno Temple, are shown as laughably incompetent, in stark contrast to the elegance of their animated counterparts. Angelina Jolie brings life to a character far more layered than expected, embodying both her physical suffering and her internal turmoil. Without resorting to excessive sentimentality, she moves fluidly between warmth and cruelty, revenge and compassion, love and hatred. Beyond drawing on her vast skills as a dramatic performer, Angelina Jolie also incorporates the necessary layer of irony that defines Maleficent. Her portrayal surpasses expectations to such a degree that it becomes forgivable when supporting characters receive minimal attention, since they exist primarily to highlight Maleficent's journey. Elle Fanning embodies Aurora with all the gentleness and innocence of a classic Disney princess. Yet the story never truly belongs to her, nor is it intended to. As Diavel, the raven who often transforms at Maleficent's command, Sam Riley builds a captivating bond of loyalty and balance with her, capable of capturing her profound sorrow with nothing more than a glance. Sharlto Copley brings life to King Stefan, whose overwhelming ambition leads him to the brink of madness. The major issue, however, lies in the film's preference for dazzling imagery over textual richness. This approach is somewhat understandable, given director Robert Stromberg's background not as a seasoned filmmaker, but as an accomplished production designer, yet it heavily influences the final product. The result is a story packed with breathtakingly crafted moments that, paradoxically, feel lifeless, weighed down by an artificiality in how they are presented. The vibrancy of the world is left underexplored, failing to justify the antagonism between the human realm and the enchanted Moors. Screenwriter Linda Wolverton, experienced as she is, does not devote enough depth to either side. When addressed, it is largely through battle sequences that impress in scale but lack the ideological weight needed to sustain the modern reinterpretation. This artificial visual emphasis feeds directly into the film's more politically correct revision of the tale. The cliché of a prince instantly falling for a princess is dismantled, which at first seems refreshing, a clever reversal of Disney convention. Yet it becomes problematic when replaced with a resolution that undermines that very reversal. marginalizing the male figures entirely and, in the process, undercutting the central premise of a villain's tale by anchoring it instead to a shallow narrative of maternal love. While this shift aligns with the build-up to the third act, where the curse finally unfolds under a redefined lens, it diminishes the supposed permanence of Aurora's eternal sleep, robbing it of genuine dramatic gravity. The love story, gone wrong between Maleficent and Stefan, is reduced to simplistic moral extremes, offering no nuanced exploration of their fractured bond. To make matters worse, the film's second act becomes little more than a drawn-out wait for the curse's fulfillment, an inevitability the audience already knows will be undone, leaving no room for tension, character interplay, or layered conflict to drive the modernization. Consequently, when the action sequences arrive, they feel abrupt, emotionally hollow, and visually exhausting, their impact dulled by an over-reliance on digital spectacle. Even so, two performances shine through. Elle Fanning as Aurora and Angelina. Jolie as Maleficent, whose combined charm and chemistry provide just enough emotional pull to sustain engagement in this retelling. Unfortunately, most of the remaining characters are either forgettable or lackluster, with particular criticism falling on the three bumbling fairies meant to raise Aurora, whose forced comedy drags the tone into imbalance. The movie swings unevenly between self-seriousness and childish silliness, resulting in a product too dull for children at times and too frivolous for adults at others. Where does the blame lie? With the screenplay? With the producers Jolie included? Or with Disney itself, whose attempt to reimagine one of its most treasured fairy tales led to a misstep of grand proportions? In truth, assigning fault may be futile, but what remains undeniable is that this production falters under the weight of its own contradictions. The experience awaiting viewers might mirror what befell Sleeping Beauty in the animated film. Many in the audience could find themselves lulled into a heavy slumber. The confrontation with the king, curiously, is set aside for much of the film only to resurface abruptly near the end, leaving an awkward gap in the depiction of the father-daughter relationship that is impossible to overlook. The climactic kiss, to make matters worse, blatantly borrows from another recent and highly successful animated feature from the studio, though it hardly needs naming. What Maleficent ultimately misses is genuine emotion, and in a fairy tale, whether retold in a darker, more serious fashion or not heartfelt feeling, is the very element that must never be absent. More is not always better, and one wonders if this film truly improves upon the already fragile 1959 version. In a way, Maleficent may have modernized itself by keeping the superficial duality of the original but flipping its sides, reframing the story to align with contemporary dialogues around femininity. This production belongs to Disney's new wave of reinterpretations aimed at reshaping its classics for today's generation, casting aside the delicate princesses and heroic princes who rescue with a single kiss. After ventures like Alice in Wonderland and Frozen, it is now the famed villainess's turn to embody the idea that true love can take many forms beyond the charm of a prince. The ambition behind this shift is admirable, but in the rush to deliver a new moral message, Maleficent neglected the vital task of telling a compelling story. Once more, we face a reimagining of a well-known fantasy tale, crafted to add depth to its characters, particularly its villains. This has become the current trend, and I suspected the formula would render the outcome predictable. For the most part, I was correct, since the events of the plot can be easily guessed, aside from the unexpectedly cruel betrayal Maleficent suffers early on. That moment genuinely startled me with its harshness. On the technical side, however, I found much of the CGI disappointing. The daylight sequences with magical creatures often looked artificial, almost cartoonishly fake, with the superimposed faces of actresses on the miniature fairies' bodies being especially unconvincing. One might think the point of digital effects is to blur reality and fantasy seamlessly, but here that illusion fails. Perhaps more attention to sets, costumes, and traditional makeup would have yielded a more authentic result. As is common, the effects fare better in nighttime scenes. Despite my frustrations with the visual shortcomings and the story's predictability, the film still managed to entertain. Strong acting carries much of the weight, and enjoyment increases if one has not already been oversaturated by similar fairy tale revisions in recent years. It also helps if one does not hold the older classics too dearly, so that these new interpretations do not feel like an insult to cherished childhood memories. In the end, what we get is a polished live-action retelling of Sleeping Beauty, anchored by Angelina Jolie, her horned appearance likening her to a striking, formidable beetle. She embodies Maleficent with both the cold grandeur Disney once gave the wicked queen of Snow White and an unexpected depth, combining humor with her signature sharp lips, fierce teeth, and sculpted cheekbones. Considering her usual action-heavy roles like Lara Croft and Salt, I had only seen Jolie previously in Changeling, where she was outstanding, and here too, she delivers with equal power. I believe Angelina Jolie gives a strong performance as the titular Maleficent, though it is unfortunate that a performer as talented as Leslie Manville is wasted in a poorly written comedic part that lacks depth. The film offers an intriguing spin on Sleeping Beauty, though the original animated movie's classic song Once Upon a Dream may not resonate with today's younger viewers, who lack the context of audiences from the 1950s. Adding to that, the decision to mention Tchaikovsky by name as the composer feels somewhat unnecessary. Visually, the movie favors muted, shadowy tones, even in the rare scenes intended to showcase light, yet it remains engaging. What we have is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, infused with shades of Romeo and Juliet, carefully bending the narrative to make Maleficent less of a true villain, since the Disney brand emphasizes heroes over antagonists. Still, the changes are so extensive that one wonders if it would have been better to craft an entirely original tale instead of revisiting this one. Most likely, the connection to the brand motivated the choice, as Maleficent is still allowed to commit cruel acts familiar from older versions, while also being shown in moments of compassion, leaving the story with a split identity. The issue isn't so much its lack of fidelity to the source adaptations, don't need strict faithfulness, but its struggle to balance opposing tones. From the start, the film reshapes the tale into an allegory about valuing marginalized groups and criticizing those in power for exploiting them. This modern reinterpretation is effective in reflecting current issues rather than clinging to outdated values historically used to harm others. The CGI borders on photorealism, occasionally dipping into the uncanny valley. Yet many of the creature designs, living embodiments of nature, are truly striking. The cinematography has energy, and Jolie's presence is commanding, even surpassing Maleficent's iconic portrayal in the 1959 animation, which is no small achievement. The Raven's sidekick is wonderfully expressive, adding charm. Some sequences, like the brutal removal of Maleficent's wings, feel heavy for children, though that imagery also works as a powerful metaphor for abuse. The story treats consent far more carefully than older versions, which is a strength. Action scenes are well staged, though the climax, while full of creative ideas, doesn't always land much like the overall film. By contrast, the 1959 Sleeping Beauty, made in a simpler era, was Disney's first animated feature in CinemaScope and stuck closely to Charles Perrault's tale, adding touches like lyrics to Tchaikovsky's ballet theme to create Once Upon a Dream and whimsical names for the fairies. It also christened the villain with the brilliant name Maleficent, combining malevolent and magnificent. As a child, I found her terrifying, especially during her dramatic entrance and exit at the christening scene. Now, decades later, Disney has reimagined the story as a live-action with heavy CGI prequel, taking liberties that some may dislike, but I found them refreshing. The film delivered what I appreciated from the original while expanding with plenty of new elements. Yes, the good fairies are now knotgrass, flittle, and thistlewood instead of flora, fauna, and Merryweather, but they clearly mirror their animated counterparts. Visually, the film shines, blending impressive effects with a distinct magical aesthetic rather than leaning into artificiality. The narrative works, the performances are strong, particularly Jolie's, and my only reservation lies with Sholto Copley's thick, nearly incomprehensible Scottish accent as Stefan, which feels unnecessary. Otherwise, the film succeeds, presenting Maleficent's story as one of a fairy who grew up in peace within a magical forest, only to see her world threatened by human invasion. She rises to become the guardian of her realm, yet a devastating betrayal hardens her once kind heart into stone. Consumed by vengeance, Maleficent confronts the new king and casts a powerful curse upon his infant daughter, Aurora. As the princess matures, Maleficent comes to realize that Aurora represents not only the fate of the kingdom, but also the key to restoring her own sense of joy and redemption. From the very beginning, it is clear that this film offers something unusual, something bold, enchanting, and potentially unsettling for purists devoted to the original Sleeping Beauty. This retelling flips the beloved fairy tale on its head. And though it stands as one of Disney's most daring risks with a major production, the gamble succeeds spectacularly. Angelina Jolie shines in the central role, imbuing Maleficent with depth and compassion. Despite the curse she inflicts upon an innocent child, audiences can't help but sympathize with her pain and sorrow, which resonate throughout the storyline. Sholto Copley, however, feels less effective. He begins with promise, portraying a vulnerable and relatable figure, but quickly devolves into an exaggerated villain, complete with theatrical rants and overblown gestures. The sets and costumes are breathtaking, and while darker undertones of abuse exist within the narrative, they are quietly pushed aside beneath layers of allegory. 2 decades from now, younger generations, my daughter included, will likely treasure this film in the same way my peers cherish Labyrinth, The Goonies, or Gremlins, as a defining piece of their childhood cinema. It is witty, heartfelt, tinged with menace, and mercifully resists the trend of spawning a bloated trilogy. Maleficent 2014 ****. Cast: Angelina Jolie, Elle Fanning, Sholto Copley, Leslie Manville, Imelda Staunton, Juno Temple, Sam Riley, Brenton Thwaites, Kenneth Cranham, Hannah New. Narrator: Janet McTeer. This imaginative live-action reimagining of Disney's Sleeping Beauty retells the legend through the eyes of its notorious sorceress. Jolie, perfectly suited to the role, embodies Maleficent as a woman whose heartbreak fuels her lust for revenge, creating both an origin story and reinvention of a classic villainess. Linda Wolverton's script sometimes softens the menace a bit too much, painting her moral darkness in muted shades of gray. Yet this works in harmony with Robert Stromberg's direction, an approach reminiscent of Tim Burton's Outsiders. A Human 2 sensibility. The visual design, courtesy of Dylan Cole and Gary Freeman, dazzles, while James Newton Howard's sweeping Elfman-like score, Dean Semler's lush cinematography, and Rick Baker's digitally enhanced prosthetics, including those razor-sharp cheekbones, elevate the production further. Elle Fanning radiates sweetness and innocence as Aurora, promising her place as one of her generation's standout actresses, while Copley's power-obsessed king exudes oily charisma in the vein of Alan Rickman. The 3D presentation enriches the fairy tale aesthetic with genuine storybook grandeur. Ultimately, Maleficent emerges as a strikingly sophisticated tale, appealing to both children and adults alike, weaving excitement, tenderness, and a clever redefinition of true love. The characters resonate, the fantasy world glows with painterly beauty, and Jolie's mesmerizing presence ensures this becomes the defining role of her career. From the delicately sculpted cheekbones that echo the animated design to Sam Riley's transformative sidekick and the vividly realized fairy creatures, every detail contributes to a magical spectacle. Fanning embodies Aurora's innocence flawlessly. Brenton Thwaites makes for a fitting prince, and the mischievous fairies add warmth and humor. This film surpasses recent attempts like Mirror Mirror and Snow White and the Huntsman, offering a balance of darkness, enchantment, and genuine heart. Maleficent is a flawless fusion of adventure and fairy tale enchantment, standing out as one of the most captivating films of the year. The narrative revisits Sleeping Beauty, but this time through the eyes of the dark fairy whose betrayal fuels her rage and thirst for vengeance. This retelling manages to appeal to both children experiencing the tale for the first time and adults who fondly remember Disney's 1959 animated classic. The storyline draws inspiration from the Brothers Grimm, while presenting a reimagined perspective. Angelina Jolie embodies Maleficent with profound emotion. Her gestures, cries, laughter, and even her expressions radiate an intensity that resonates deeply. Watching the film feels like uncovering a long-hidden secret about this infamous character. The updated artistry offers renewed portrayals of Maleficent, King Stefan, Princess Aurora, Prince Philip, and the Raven Diavel, crafting a universe unlike any seen before, echoing Jolie's own description. The plot centers on a graceful, innocent fairy with powerful black wings who once lived peacefully in the moors, a magical land of harmony. This tranquility shatters when humans, threatened by the moors' growing power, attempt to wipe them out. Maleficent evolves into both villain and heroine, embodying the true Sleeping Beauty, since her pure spirit lies dormant beneath bitterness and revenge, positioning her as a tragic anti-heroine. The film's brilliance lies in retelling the story from a previously unexplored viewpoint, delivering moral lessons along the way such as the dangers of revenge and the regret it may bring. Spoiler: it also redefines the concept of love breaking free from the old Disney tradition of portraying only romantic, heterosexual love. Directed by Robert Stromberg, renowned for his work in visual effects, the film astonishes with its breathtaking visuals, much like Alice in Wonderland and Avatar, which earned him an Academy Award for art direction. Complementing this grandeur is James Newton Howard's epic, atmospheric score, which aligns beautifully with the magical setting. Linda Wolverton's script is equally compelling, lively, and poignant, masterfully filling the gaps left by the original tale, particularly the unanswered question of why Maleficent cast the curse. Unlike the simplistic portrayal of her as a purely wicked sorceress, this version lays bare her betrayal, grief, and desire for revenge from beginning to end. The film shines as a moving, witty, and meaningful production. Maleficent emerges as a once kind fairy queen transformed into a vengeful figure after being deceived and mutilated by her childhood love. Jolie's anguished screams make her despair and fury palpable, epitomized when she bitterly declares, "True love does not exist." Yet the story culminates in her realization that anger cannot heal wounds and that true love, though different from her expectations, is real after all, and it does not depend on marriage. Similarly, in Frozen, we witnessed an ice queen reject her duties, family, and kingdom, only to discover that self-acceptance and connection, not isolation, define true strength, again without the need for a husband. For decades, Disney and Hollywood often drew upon negative stereotypes of women, portraying them as villains or damsels. But in today's era of psychological nuance and gender equality, such stereotypes have lost their place. Maleficent boldly breaks from that tradition, offering a tale that is at once visually dazzling, emotionally resonant, and culturally relevant. Life is never simply divided into good and bad. We now understand that the Ice Queen carries old wounds. The cruel stepmother hides a deep fear of being abandoned. The Wicked Witch endured trauma in childhood. And even the eerie loner often conceals a painful secret. On the other hand, not every girl is destined to be a princess, nor is every mother a flawless figure of virtue. Shouldn't Hollywood finally move beyond these shallow portrayals of women that only define them by fixed roles? To Disney's credit, the studio has made genuine efforts to change this narrative. In the updated fairy tales on screen, morals are no longer so rigid. Men and women approach relationships differently, and that distinction is an essential lesson for young girls to grasp before they step into adolescence. Girls are not helpless beings in need of constant rescuing, nor should their lives revolve around waiting for someone to save them. Another powerful takeaway is that if Prince Charming never arrives, or if he proves far less charming than expected, or simply isn't the right match, a woman can still carve out happiness and discover love on her own terms. The traditional idea of the flawless prince is, in these stories, intentionally and almost ruthlessly dismissed. Female writers and filmmakers clearly feel it is their responsibility to ensure this new generation receives that message. Even fathers are not exempt from scrutiny here, as the narrative insists that no person is wholly virtuous or irredeemably vile. Those absolutes no longer define our culture, and our stories should reflect that reality. Yet, for those who still long for the old-fashioned tale, don't worry. These films haven't abandoned the idea completely. Each still includes a princess who ends up with her Prince Charming. Maleficent, a reimagining of Disney's Sleeping Beauty, fits this mold. The film attempts to breathe new life into the story by humanizing its main villain. The issue, however, is that this effort comes far too late. Instead of giving Maleficent emotional depth early on, the filmmakers settle for a bland, narrated backstory that robs the audience of true connection. Simply being told that she was kind cannot spark empathy. You need to see her kindness to believe it. And the movie never delivers. With that lost opportunity, hopes fall back on the rest of the tale. Unfortunately, the other characters are flat. The performances swing wildly into overacting, and any potential relatability is lost. The special effects are inconsistent, at times decent, but far more often cheap and clumsy, which is a major flaw for a film centered on fantasy and magic. The one element that accidentally entertains is the action, poorly staged but laughably so, with awkward camera zooms that feel more like a video game cutscene than a cinematic battle. It's absurd, but oddly amusing in its failure. In the end, Maleficent falls apart. It isn't a strong film by any measure. It's only redeeming. Quality is that its flaws are occasionally funny. The characters feel so lifeless that even robots could have played their parts without any difference. The CGI effects are often poorly executed. The effort to make the character more humanized feels clumsy and ineffective, and the action sequences are nothing short of dreadful. In the end, my advice would be to simply skip this one altogether, whichever shelf it belongs on, and choose a different film instead. The story centers around a fairy who falls in love with a human, only to be betrayed, and she dedicates her existence to vengeance, living by the belief that true love is nothing but an illusion. As I've mentioned repeatedly, it is always an advantage when a movie made for children also manages to captivate adults. At its core, this is a great fairy tale that has been translated onto the big screen with breathtaking imagery and poised performances, keeping the audience engaged right up until the very last scene. Still, it is Angelina Jolie who ultimately carries the entire film. Her performance as a cold-hearted, vengeful fairy is remarkable, arguably one of her finest roles, enhanced further by the tender moments with her real-life daughter. The film attempts to retell the origins of one of Disney's most iconic villains, Maleficent. And while there is potential for a darker story of an innocent outcast reshaped into a feared monster, the result doesn't quite fulfill its promise. There are hints of inspiration from tragic dramas, possibly even Shakespearean ones. But the fact that the director is mainly known for his work in visual effects becomes obvious. What we are given is one of the most visually stunning blockbusters of the year. Yet that was never meant to be the central strength of this tale. What the story needed was genuine darkness and depth, which it never truly conveys, leaving us with a disappointing portrayal of the villain's beginnings. Telling a villain's backstory doesn't always need to be complicated. In fact, a tragedy-inspired narrative would have been a perfect match here, but instead, the focus remains largely on the film's surface beauty. The main idea that the villain is really the victim of a cruel, intolerant world is clear, but the script never goes deep enough to make it impactful. Characters are underdeveloped, relationships lack weight, and Princess Aurora's bond with Maleficent never rises beyond being mere exposition into the magical realm and admiration of its creatures. There's no real emotional resonance, which undermines the story's central themes of betrayal and threat, making them feel inconsequential. The film could easily have dedicated more time to developing its characters while restricting the narrator to the opening and closing scenes. Instead, it invests heavily in showcasing the visual spectacle. We can't entirely fault the director for indulging in his expertise, since the visual design is the only truly lively aspect of the movie. The effects dazzle, the costume work is lavish, and the cinematography has the potential to become iconic. But, again, this emphasis is misplaced. These visuals might work wonderfully in a superhero adventure or another action-driven fantasy, but this story requires heart, dramatic tension, and layered characters. Fortunately, Angelina Jolie's performance rises above these flaws. As expected, she dominates as Maleficent, delivering a commanding presence. Though only one particular moment truly leaves a lasting impression on viewers, and that was already familiar from the classic Sleeping Beauty. Overall, she captures the spirit of the role, giving Maleficent a depth that makes the character effective. The supporting cast, however, contributes little in comparison. Elle Fanning undeniably shines with her natural charm as Princess Aurora. But the script reduces her to embodying innocence alone, leaving her with little else to explore. As for Manville, Staunton, and Temple, they are relegated to broad comic relief, turning the trio of fairies into something akin to a female variation of the Three Stooges. Technically, the film achieves much in terms of design, makeup, and visuals, and it is anchored by solid acting. Yet its greatest flaw lies in its lack of true darkness. Though it looks shadowy on the surface, thematically and emotionally it falls flat, even making the 1959 Sleeping Beauty appear far grimmer and more unsettling for children than this so-called dark reimagining. The central idea that Maleficent's wickedness is merely a projection by those unwilling to accept difference could have been powerful, but it falters because the characters and their interactions lack sufficient development. As a result, the film struggles to justify why this villain is so fascinating. In the end, the movie lands in an awkward middle ground. Not terrible, not excellent, simply unworthy of what Maleficent could have been. That said, as a fairy tale reinterpretation, it still works reasonably well. The story draws on the darker traditions of old tales while keeping the Disney magic intact, echoing the studio's classic style of storytelling, which seems to be making a comeback. The art direction lends the film an ominous tone without over-explaining it, and Maleficent's design deviates from the typical Disney fairy image, opting instead for folklore-inspired features with a demonic flair. The costuming and makeup stand out as among the strongest aspects of the production. Despite following the familiar Disney formula, the film avoids some of the usual fairy tale cliches while also giving Disney princesses a bit more respect and relevance in today's context. Angelina Jolie embodies Maleficent perfectly, her appearance and presence utterly mesmerizing. Elle Fanning, too, delivers a delightful portrayal of Aurora sweet but never cloying. Sholto Copley offers intensity as King Stefan, while Sam Riley's performance as Diaval, the crow-turned-human companion, reinvents the role of the classic animal sidekick. One might even argue the story would have flourished better as an animated feature, given Disney's long mastery of fairy tale animation, yet it still proves a worthy live-action effort. From the outset, the film dazzles with dazzling visuals, lush landscapes, fantastical beings reminiscent of video game worlds, and Jolie's magnificent wings, all signaling Disney's lavish investment. But beneath the spectacle lies a recycled narrative wearing a pseudo-dark mask, an attempt at a gothic edge that never fully convinces. Jolie herself is the movie's saving grace, magnetic and commanding to the point where even her sculpted cheekbones feel iconic. She carries the entire film on her shoulders, compensating for a script riddled with weak spots. The rest of the cast does their job adequately, but it is Jolie who ensures the audience stays engaged. Without her, the production would barely rise above the level of a costly made-for-TV movie. Ultimately, Disney has reworked Sleeping Beauty with a layer of redemption arc polish and called it new. The issue is that the trope of the villain is only misunderstood due to betrayal, feels repetitive and underwhelming. Aurora, unfortunately, is so one-dimensional that she comes across as lifeless, almost as though created by a machine rather than performed by a person. The visual effects sparkle impressively, but are they really enough to carry the weight of the film? Sadly, no. It's the same as giving a rundown house a glossy paint job. The surface dazzles, but the flaws remain exposed. The set design may be gorgeous, yet the excessive polish leaves it sterile, devoid of life or grit. You can't help but long for rough edges, a touch of authenticity, something textured that feels alive. Disney flirts with the idea of darkness, but it's a watered-down version, more like shadows cast by artificial light than genuine menace. In the hands of Tim Burton, this could have been a deliciously twisted spectacle, but instead, it settles into a neatly packaged, all-audiences-friendly dark light fantasy. It's rebellion and bubble wrap safe, enough for a family outing, but far from revolutionary. Maleficent ends up like a cup of decaf. It mimics the look and aroma of real coffee, but without the necessary punch. Angelina Jolie works hard to breathe life into the role. Yet the sluggish pace and dependence on computer wizardry can't fully disguise the bland narrative underneath. It's serviceable entertainment, sure, but those hoping for a fiercely bold fairy tale will be left disappointed. Long ago, a fairy child named Maleficent and a mortal boy, Stefan, dared to cross the boundary, dividing their worlds, and forged a close bond. As Stefan matured into a man, ambition drew him to serve his king, while Maleficent remained guardian of her mystical kin, yearning for his return. When the human kingdom launched an unprovoked attack upon the magical border, Maleficent, Angelina Jolie, struck back, crushing the army and leaving their monarch fatally wounded. On his deathbed, the king promised his throne to whoever avenged him, prompting Stefan Sholto Copley to betray the very friend he once cherished. Heartbroken, Maleficent struck back at his child's christening, dooming Princess Aurora with a cruel enchantment that only true love's kiss could break. As Aurora, Elle Fanning, grew, Maleficent's hatred wavered in the presence of her innocence, even as King Stefan hardened in paranoia, awaiting the day his old companion would confront him once more. For a story so vulnerable to missteps, the retelling avoids disaster by honoring the bones of the original while reshaping Maleficent into a layered, conflicted figure. Jolie is magnetic, her every glance conveying volumes without words, making it difficult to imagine anyone else in the role. Aurora, though pushed into a supporting arc, is not diminished. Through Fanning's warmth, she becomes the gentle force that softens Maleficent's bitterness. Sholto Copley embodies the descent of a man consumed by his throne, while Sam Riley brings charm and balance as Diavel, the raven-turned companion whose loyalty steadies Maleficent's darker impulses. With such a cast, the film already shines, yet it is the fusion of performances with the artistry behind the camera that solidifies its atmosphere. The production design, cinematography, and seamless CGI weave a world where enchanted forests, looming castles, and fantastical beings breathe as though they too are characters. Though largely digital, these creations strengthen the fantasy's mood, becoming both backdrop and driving force in a tale of betrayal, vengeance, and redemption. If Maleficent falters at all, it's largely in the editing, where some sequences could have benefited from smoother continuity. Robert Stromberg, the acclaimed visual effects artist making his debut as a director, occasionally struggles with shifting the tone between dramatic storytelling and action-driven moments. Aside from this noticeable flaw, however, he demonstrates potential and manages to tell the story with reasonable skill. One particularly striking moment, teased in the trailers, perfectly sets the mood of the entire film. Aurora confronts her shadowy guardian and says, "I know who you are." Maleficent, thrilled at being acknowledged for the villainess she imagines herself to be, steps proudly into the light, delivering a sinister blow. Yet when Aurora responds in an unexpected way, Jolie delivers a sharp, perfectly timed reply without losing any of the character's fierce intensity. This scene reveals not only Maleficent's surprise, even deep into her descent into darkness, but also hints that beneath her hardened layers, fragments of innocence and goodness might still remain. With such heavy material adapted from what is traditionally a children's tale, Maleficent manages to balance its commitment to shadowy themes with glimmers of light. And while this incarnation of the dark fairy may not be as unredeemable as her animated counterpart, it's still immensely satisfying to watch her turn the tables on those who wronged her. The film continues Disney's recent trend of reworking classic fairy tales, a movement that gained traction with Tim Burton's inexplicably popular Alice in Wonderland. Most follow-ups in this vein have failed critically and financially, leaving audiences wondering why studios persist in making them. Overstuffed with CGI, these adaptations often disregard their original sources, offering few meaningful improvements and plenty of questionable changes. Maleficent, however, distinguishes itself because there's real thought behind it. Rather than a prequel, Oz the Great and Powerful, or a wholesale reinvention, Jack the Giant Slayer, it shifts the perspective. The outcome is certainly different from the traditional tale, but much of the film is devoted to exploring Maleficent's backstory, why she curses Aurora, and how she spends the 16 years afterward. It isn't exactly realistic. There are still fairies, dragons, and the inevitable true love's kiss. But it does feel closer to how the tale might play out if it were grounded in reality. Maleficent isn't evil for the sake of being evil. She experiences love, regret, and compassion. King Stefan, meanwhile, is consumed by paranoia and obsession rather than portrayed as a carefree ruler, ultimately dismissing his own daughter when she re-enters his life. In this sense, he becomes the villain by default, though more out of ambition and fixation than outright wickedness. Even the three fairy godmothers are given a dose of believability. In the animated Sleeping Beauty, they inexplicably raise Aurora in a forest yet remain laughably inept at basic household tasks. Here, Their incompetence is shown consistently. They fail miserably for years and can't wait to hand Aurora back. True, these revisions defy the original portrayals, and turning Maleficent into a sympathetic lead is initially difficult to accept. After all, how do you empathize with a sadistic sorceress for nearly 2 hours? But it works, and the characters feel more authentic and multidimensional, moving far beyond the flat archetypes of the cartoon. The performances elevate the film further. Unsurprisingly, Angelina Jolie dominates in the role she was seemingly destined to play. From the project's inception, she was tied to the character, and despite delays, she remained committed. It's clear why. This role fits her perfectly, and she delivers it with power, charisma, and depth, ultimately carrying the entire film on her shoulders. She manages to reveal Maleficent's gentler side with real finesse, while also diving into her louder, more theatrical villainous moments, yet she wisely avoids slipping into overacting. Sharlto Copley makes his return, this time surprising with a convincing Scottish accent. Considering that only half a decade ago, he had no formal acting background at all, it's a feat worth noting. His portrayal of Stefan is strong, though. It does raise concern that he may be getting cornered into villain roles, as his last several films, this one included, have cast him in antagonistic shoes. Elle Fanning brings charm to Aurora, though her character seems written to constantly beam